Hello, and welcome to Lopes on Movies. My name is Joey Lopes, and today I'm joined by Connor.
Hey, Joey.
How you doing, Connor?
Good. Well, I mean, good, but we're going to be touching on a tough subject, but
Yeah, a little
I'm
bit.
good.
But this is kind of a special episode, I think. This is something that I'm particularly passionate about doing, so I'm kind of excited to dive in, even though it is kind of from some sad news. But we will, how about we just get right into it? You know, why beat
let's
around
do
the
it.
bush? You know, why waste any time? So
Why bother?
the intro to this episode was me playing this harmonica riff, and if you're familiar with the riff, then you probably already know what we're going to be talking about. But if you're not, we are here to talk about the life of Ennio Morricone. He recently passed away. It was just Monday morning, I believe, that we found out that he had passed away. If you're not familiar with Ennio Morricone, he is one of the greatest film composers of all time. He's just an iconic presence in the film industry. His scores are some of the greatest scores ever composed. I mean, I'm not, in my opinion, like I have no problem saying he is the greatest film composer of all time. It is obviously, subjective, but at least for me, like nobody has matched his absolute mastery of film composition and film scoring. It's just an unbelievable career the guy had. A huge inspiration for me as a person that loves movies, as a musician, and in hearing about him passing away definitely hit me pretty hard. So it felt like a good time to do an episode specifically about Ennio Morricone and sort of his impact and what made him so special, and maybe turn some people on to his music that may not be as familiar.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We actually talked about him earlier in a previous show, maybe a couple times, but most recently, I remember when we talked about the Sergio Leone film, Once Upon a Time in America, where he did the score. An excellent score on that one. I think we touched on that, how like the score is so impactful in the way that and I'm sure we'll get into it. Just the partnership that Leone had with Morricone, just working together to. I don't know what the percentage is that they say. Like a film, like some say that sound is even more important, or music is more important than the visuals. And
I think
Morricone is the master.
It varies from person to person. I think most of the time when people review movies, the music isn't talked about that much. Because I think there's a perception, especially lately, that film music should be invisible. It's something that should be in the background, enhancing the visuals, but not necessarily taking center stage in any particular way. But that was definitely not something that Sergio Leone believed in. And Ennio's work definitely stands out and goes toe-to-toe with the images, equally as important, sometimes more important. Like Sergio Leone would say it's like 60-40 images and music, and some people would say 50-50. But obviously, whenever you watch a movie that Ennio Morricone scored, it's almost impossible not to talk about the music just because of how much of an impression it makes. So, of course, we had to talk about it with Once Upon a Time in America. But now I think we're just going to spend an entire episode just talking about Ennio's life and work, and some of our own thoughts on his great contributions to movies. So one thing I want to start with is that I actually have an Ennio Morricone story related to me specifically.
Nice. Let's hear it.
I first encountered Ennio Morricone's music when I was in college. I think the first Sergio Leone movie I watched was actually Once Upon a Time in America. Like I went right for the last movie he made before watching his westerns, which is kind of weird. But nonetheless, I watched Once Upon a Time in America. Loved it immediately. Was listening to the score like constantly after I'd seen it. A little bit later, I watched Once Upon a Time in the West, and same experience. Like I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was so incredible and moving and great music that I just started from there, just kind of going on Spotify and like listening to random Ennio Morricone scores and just being really taken with his work and how incredible it was. So around this time, this was probably around like 2013, 2014. I don't even remember how I saw this. It was just like randomly browsing the internet. I saw that Ennio was actually planning on coming to America for a performance at the Barclays Center in New York. So he was going to be conducting a live orchestra of some of his hits from the greatest movies that he composed for. And as soon as tickets were available, I made sure to get them. So I had tickets for this performance, but unfortunately it was canceled because Ennio actually fell ill at one point, and his doctor recommended he not travel. So I came this close to getting to see Ennio Morricone perform live, and it's one of the biggest disappointments I've ever had. Just knowing, especially because he was already in poor health at that point, and I knew that after he wasn't coming to America for this, there probably wasn't ever going to be another opportunity. Definitely really sad, but I continued listening to Ennio Morricone, just falling deeper in love with his music ever since. And I think I can say pretty confidently that like seeing Leone's movies with the Ennio scores like changed my life in a way, just because I was already like passionate about movies and stuff, but I don't think I had ever been nearly as like obsessed with movies and music, and kind of like the perfect marriage of those two things than when I saw those movies and the work that they did. Like, to me, like there's no greater art form than the combination of moving images and music, like putting them together, working together in tandem to tell a story. I think their collaborations are the absolute peak of that just kind of style of filmmaking, and to me it's the most beautiful thing in the world. So I'm super like happy that we have all of these movies to watch, and super happy that we have this body of work that we can look into. So I think the just to end this section with a quote from Sergio Leone. This is what he used to say about his movies. He said, "I've always felt that music is more expressive than dialogue. I've always said that my best dialogue and screenwriter is Ennio Morricone, because many times it is more important a note or an orchestration than a line said. When you can manage to express something with a look and the music instead of saying it with words or having the character speak, I think it's a more complete work." And honestly, I feel like that quote pretty much sums up my entire feeling on movies and the potential for movies as a storytelling medium. I always say that my favorite filmmakers are Leone, Kurosawa, and Genndy Tartakovsky, and I think a lot of that comes from this sense of like how to tell a story with images and music, and it's prioritizing that over the dialogue, which is a more like theatrical approach, which is great on its own, but definitely is a different kind of storytelling than I think Sergio Leone and a lot of my favorite filmmakers would go for. But yeah, to me, it's the most beautiful thing in the world.
Yeah, well said.
So Connor,
Yo,
how about we do a little bit of background on Ennio Morricone? Can you tell us a little bit about his history?
sure, I can do that. So he's born in Rome. They say he's started writing his first compositions when he was 6 years old. Eventually started taking trumpet lessons. Completed a 4-year music program in just 6 months at age 12. So he was a musical prodigy, which is no surprise. And the funny coincidence is he attended the same school as a child as Sergio Leone. There's a class picture of them that is all over the internet right now. And the funny thing is that they didn't realize that they knew each other when Leone hired Morricone for A Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah, it's famous, a really
Dollars trilogy.
Yeah, I think Morricone, like, as soon as he first saw Sergio Leone, he recognized him. Was like, "Wait, are you the same Sergio Leone from school?" And after that, I think it was meant to be.
He started working as a composer, first on radio dramas, then worked as a trumpet player in jazz bands, and arranger of pop tunes before eventually transitioning to film composition in particular. In 1964, after Leone hired him for A Fistful of Dollars, the rest is history. A Fistful of Dollars went on to become the most successful Italian film of all time. Ennio worked with Leone on every one of his subsequent films, as well as with many other great Italian directors. Eventually, Ennio would start working on Hollywood films, which would get him his first Oscar nomination for his score of Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven, which I know you just watched, Joey.
I did.
Your quick review of Days of Heaven.
It's great.
All right, good. I'll have to watch that one too. All right, he did quite a few scores for other big Hollywood films in the 80s, including Brian De Palma's The Untouchables and John Carpenter's The Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Very different. So he has a wide range.
Yeah, like you listen to The Thing score, and it's completely different from everything he did with like Sergio Leone.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It's very like synth focused and strange. So he had an incredible range.
Mm-hmm. The most recent association was with Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino would use like lots of pieces of Morricone's music in his films, and they eventually collaborated together. and with one original song for Django Unchained, and then he did the score for The Hateful Eight, which he won his first Oscar for in 2016. Now, I remember that was a great moment. Quentin Tarantino is obviously a huge champion of film, and he grew up. I think he said that his favorite movie is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah,
right?
he's
sure
a huge fan of Sergio Leone.
Yeah.
You can tell, like, his movies are very different from Sergio's movies, but they have like a you can very clearly tell the influence. He would use a lot of pieces of Ennio Morricone's music in his own films. And it was only in 2016 that they actually collaborated on a full score together, which I think he pretty much told Ennio, like, do whatever you want. I'm not gonna give you any notes. Just write the score, and we're just gonna put it in the movie, and that's that. So just because Quentin Tarantino, he's on record saying that he considers Morricone on the level of like Bach for him. He's like he's the greatest of all time. So he wasn't going to give him any notes. He was going to tell him, go ham, and he did. It's a great score. It's crazy though that it's the first time he ever won an Oscar for a movie. Considering how incredible his career was. He had a chance of winning for the movie The Mission, where everybody thought he was going to win, but it ended up going to Herbie Hancock for the score to a movie called Round Midnight, which is a great movie, but it was a little bit controversial at the time because a lot of that score was rearrangements of existing compositions compared to of the completely original score that Morricone put together for The Mission. So there was some controversy there, but he got it eventually. He also got a Lifetime Achievement Oscar a couple of years before that. So he was well recognized for his work.
Yeah,
thankfully.
Yeah, sometimes it happens too. Like there's lots of just all-time greats that Oscar doesn't always get it right. Obviously,
Yeah, I mean Martin Scorsese didn't get an Oscar until The Departed.
Which is definitely not his best movie. Like, I mean, it's a good film, but it's not.
Oh, it's a great movie, but yeah, I mean, we're
that's
talking
not...
about the guy who made Goodfellas and Casino in the '90s,
right.
And Taxi Driver. Like, come on,
but right?
It is what it is.
Oscar doesn't always get it right. It's just thinking back to that. So you were going to see him in 2014.
Yep.
And he did the score for The Hateful Eight, and that was for 2016. The man never stopped working.
No, he didn't.
And I think he still had some projects that were being worked on till the day he died. Like I looked at his page recently, and there's things that haven't come out yet that are in the works. Like, so he never stopped working. He's the kind of a lot of these artists are like that are just this is their life.
The guy loved what he did.
Doing this,
I've read a lot of interviews with Ennio Morricone, and he's a very interesting guy. Like, there's sometimes he can be very blunt and kind of like serious, and sometimes he had a little bit of a slight chip on his shoulder for being seen as the Western guy.
Yeah.
Because obviously his career spanned decades, and he only did 6 movies with Sergio Leone, right? So, like, just completely thinking of him as the guy who did Westerns is very, very much not accurate. But he was very grateful for all of the love that he had gotten, and he loved working on movies. It was a part of him, man. It was his life. And
he gets taken out of context a little bit too.
Oh, he does,
there, which happens all the time. But the thing that's funny about the Hateful Eight score that he did is when Tarantino was going through his was making westerns.
Yeah.
If you listen to that score, I don't know if you had a chance to re-listen to it. It's not a western score.
Oh, not at all. No.
Which
is
almost
like a horror movie. It's weird.
Right. It's like a horror movie, it's perfect for that film too, because all the characters are these shady characters who have like something to hide, and it works really well for that movie. But I wonder. Like you just said that, I wonder if in the back of his head he's like, I'm not, he wants me for a Western thing. I'm not going to give him a Western score, though.
It's funny you say that, because I was reading some interviews with him before we recorded this, and I'm pretty certain that the score for The Hateful Eight, like, he intentionally did not want it to sound like a Western score.
Oh yeah, that's like exactly what I figured.
So it's and it doesn't, but it works very well for the movie. It's a very, very interesting, very interesting score. I remember, like, as soon as the movie started and started with that theme song, I was like, oh man, I'm in. Let's go.
Yeah, that giant, it was a long overture, right?
Yeah.
That's a
sounds like a bassoon or something that's like playing the melody. It's really low, really, really low. It's just awesome. All right, so let's talk a little bit about his craft here. Obviously, Ennio Morricone is a composer. I read a tweet from the video game composer Grant Kirkhope. He's well known for a lot of video games. He worked with Rare in the 90s, so like Banjo-Kazooie.
Okay,
And more recently he did the Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle.
Okay.
soundtrack, but he's been working on soundtracks for years. So he's a well-known composer, definitely a really, really cool guy. And this is what he had to say. Ennio Morricone dying is such a loss. There's not too many left of the old brigade of composers who really knew/know how to write music. Once they're gone, there is no one that can replace them. And just another quote from earlier on, the director Barry Levinson, who Ennio Morricone worked with at one point. He said this: "He doesn't have a piano in his studio. I always thought that with composers, you sit at the piano and you try to find the melody. There's no such thing with Morricone. He hears a melody and he writes it down. He hears the orchestration completely done." So there's these two quotes paint a particular picture of the kind of composer that Ennio Morricone was. Like, the guy was beyond professional. Like, he would often talk about his work on film scores, not in a like kind of dismissive sense, but as something that was just a part of his identity as a composer. And the reality is Ennio Morricone was a true master of his craft. And the particular skill set that guys like him had, and guys like, Bernard Herrmann, like, that is becoming increasingly rare. Like, people these days do not have the same range of skills that a guy like Ennio Morricone did, because a lot of music now, especially for film, is very much based on production. Like, guys like Hans Zimmer are very well known not for their compositions necessarily, but for their mastery of like production techniques. Mm-hmm. Whereas a guy like Morricone was a master orchestrator, a master writer of melody, and his contributions to cinema are the kind of thing that we definitely don't see much anymore. There are very few composers that have the skill set to write music like that nowadays, and it's just a fact, and it's a shame. But it's not that it's impossible to write music like this. It's just that it's very, very hard, and it takes a very, very talented person. And Morricone was one of those people. One of the main things I think is really important about Ennio Morricone's just strengths as a composer is his orchestration ability, which, if you're not aware, like, orchestration is basically like, if you have a song, right, you have a melody, you might have some chords underneath that melody. That can be defined as a song, but the orchestration is how that song is presented. So a song could be presented as a vocal with guitar, right? A song could be presented as a piano, like a solo piano piece, or a song can be presented as a full orchestral arrangement, right? And the thing that Ennio Morricone was a genius at was coming up with unique and brilliant orchestration techniques. Like, he would find the most creative choices for instruments, the most creative ways of using them in combination. Ennio Morricone is really the guy that kind of opened up the floodgates for, anything is possible in film composition. Even though nowadays I don't feel like there are still standard styles, I do feel like Ennio Morricone is responsible for just kind of saying anything goes. We can score a movie with whatever we want, right? So before I get into that, I just want to clarify that even though we're talking about orchestration here, it should be noted that Ennio Morricone's melodies are among the best in the business. Some of the most beautifully conceived melodies I've ever heard. And the thing with a good melody is that it has the quality of seeming so perfect that it was like inevitable, that it wasn't written by somebody, that it was just something that always existed. It's like seemingly simple, effortless, but it's extremely hard to write perfect melodies like this. Like, there's a good story about like Paul McCartney, how he the tune for Yesterday, like he came up with it just randomly one day and was like completely convinced that he stole it from somewhere because it was so good. But nobody could place it. It was original. But that's the kind of thing that happens with a good melody. It's like you there's no way to like, it's so hard to craft. It just happens. It's like it feels magical when it happens. And Ennio Morricone time and time again would find these melodies that it's seemingly simple but just absolutely gorgeous and incredible. So it's important to note that even though we're talking about orchestration, his melodies are amazing. But nonetheless, he would arrange these melodies in such a way, and that's really what made him famous, I think. So the thing that's important to remember is that Ennio was a very forward-thinking, experimental musician. He actually worked for many years with a group of avant-garde composers during his time making music for movies, And this kind of interest in the avant-garde kind of bled into his film scores in really interesting ways. So like in his westerns, he's famous for like the weird instruments he would use, the weird textures he would put into the scores. Because originally, like A Fistful of Dollars was a super low budget movie, so they couldn't hire like an entire orchestra at the time. So he would do things like, put in whip cracks, gunshots, whistling, electric guitar, which was still fairly like strange at the time. Like rock and roll was a thing, but it wasn't something that you heard in movies,
Yeah.
So he would blend this with like orchestral textures, and these you would create this strange like world that at this point is so iconic that it's almost the default thing that people think of when they think of Western music. They think of these like weird sounds. They think of like the coyote yell from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. They think of like the grunts. They think of the whistles. But even beyond that, I feel like Ennio's was just an incredibly creative orchestrator, even with like kind of typical like string sections and such. Like his string writing to me is like some of the best string writing in the world. Like it completely melts my soul every time I hear a good Morricone string section. So I think now would be a good time to maybe talk a little bit about some of his famous compositions, because if you're not super familiar with Ennio Morricone, there are plenty of incredible ways to get indoctrinated into his work. Now, unfortunately, because we do upload these episodes to YouTube, we can't really play any actual Ennio Morricone tracks, or else we'll get like copyright claimed and the video might get muted. So we don't want that. But thankfully, I'm able to perform some of these pieces myself on guitar, or at least like the melodies to them. And harmonica, I guess, because I did play the harmonica intro earlier. So we'll be able to play a couple of snippets of some of the tunes we're going to talk about. So obviously we'll start with the spaghetti western, right? He's super famous for inventing the whole spaghetti western sound. It's like the default sound that people think about when they think about the West. But even though it's kind of gotten parodied to the point of cliche, I feel like it's still like totally iconic. Like it's completely cool. Like you cannot stop Western music from being incredibly cool, especially the score for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is absolutely iconic. One of the greatest film scores of all time. So there's a couple of great tunes from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'll play the melody to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly theme right now. So have a listen to this.
Yeah, can I just say that it's a great song.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
This past weekend, I was in Lewis, Delaware, obviously, and was walking in the town, and there was an outdoor venue, like an outdoor like restaurant area, and there was a band playing that song, and I thought I was hearing it in my head, like oh my god, this is so great, and then I just keep walking over and I see that there's a whole band playing it, and like everybody around there, like people are like coming from, like just from all over, just like you're totally into it, and I'm just on the sidewalk, just kind of like listening, and then like it's such a great song that
it's just hype. It like gets you going,
It was weird. I was just like drawn to it. Like it's wild, and then it's just so strange that. Like that is that a song you hear like a band playing like that? Like not really, but like.
Although funnily enough, like Ennio Morricone's music does have like sort of a history of being played by like pretty famous acts. Like another song from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, "The Ecstasy of Gold," which might be the most famous Morricone composition, maybe, was actually Metallica's opening song for a while. They actually played "The Ecstasy of Gold" to open their concerts.
And I'll tell you, a lot of those songs were sampled in a lot of other artists' music.
For sure, yeah.
It's because it's so great. Like it's because it's so unique too. Like
absolutely,
like all those things that you said, like the whips and all the stuff that's just like in it, just awesome.
So even going beyond that, like after the Dollars movies, like those movies are very much about like hero characters. And I don't say heroes as in good people. I say heroes as like these archetypal like almost like characters that don't have much about them other than their like status as just larger than life characters, right? As a result, like the music of those movies is more it's like cool, you know, it's kind of detached, it's kind of more like epic music. But eventually like Leone started writing a lot more complex characters, and as that happened, Morricone had to consequently start writing music with a lot more deep like emotional content, like stuff that can really get into more of the relationships between the characters and more of the emotional storytelling that was happening. So what ended up happening a lot in the later portion of like Leone's career is that Morricone was writing just absolutely gorgeous orchestral compositions. Really, like he was starting to do that a little bit with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because there were some very particular moments in that movie that stand out as bizarrely emotional for a Leone movie, and a lot of that had to do with Morricone's music. But then after that, Leone started leaning into it, and so like Once Upon a Time in the West, the movie Duck You Sucker, and then Once Upon a Time in America, perfect examples of this, where Morricone scores for these movies are just absolutely gorgeous, like some of the most beautiful music you'll ever hear in your life. But that said, like he still was writing just like incredibly like epic music, even with this more strong intent of moving your emotions. So like a great standout, the Man with the Harmonica theme from Once Upon a Time in the West. It's a theme that kind of connects the hero and villain of the movie together, showcases everything that's brilliant about Morricone's work. Like it's just a perfect composition, and you hear it many times in the movie, and every time it's just absolutely stunning. Like so that's the tune that opens with that kind of eerie harmonica motive that I played earlier in the episode. Then after that, it builds with this kind of ostinato figure, which is based on the harmonica motive, which like creeps in and then builds to this huge crescendo, and then distorted electric guitar. Coolest thing in the world. And I'll play that for you right here. And then after that, full orchestra comes in. You know, it plays this incredibly just like regretful, like just intense melody that perfectly encapsulates the relationship between this hero and villain, and it ends with the harmonica figure repeating again and again and again. Like it takes my breath away every time.
Yep. And even better when you watch the film together, and it's just it adds like a whole nother level to it too. When you see
absolutely, yeah, it's the kind of thing that it was made to go together. The image and the music, it was built for each other. And like I always say that Ennio's music, you can listen to it and get the entire story without needing to watch the movie. But at the same time, like when you watch the movie, you get it. Like you understand, like, yeah, this music is essential. This is not just background music. This is a part of the entire story. This is so important, and it adds everything. So I think that pretty much wraps up the amount of time we have today. But yeah, I mean, I really can't say enough how passionate I am about Ennio Morricone's music, and just how unbelievably beautiful it is. And you know, rest in peace. He's somebody that has inspired me and influenced me in countless ways that he will never know. But I'm very, very thankful for his work, and I really hope that people continue to listen to it forever.
His impact on film, changed it for the better, and it had a profound impact on some of the greatest filmmakers. It's not a coincidence that the best filmmakers around right now, they'll tell you that the top guy, Ennio Morricone. No question.
All right, thanks guys. We will see you next week.